Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called No More Stories, written by Heathborn. As soon as it came into view, we realized the angular patterns observed from orbit were unmistakably the decayed remnants of some gargantuan ancient city. Looking out from the landing craft, descending slowly towards the surface, we saw once majestic spires now toppled in debris. Where before stood great domed halls, only fractured shells remained, as if 1,000 eggs had shattered. Rows upon rows of buildings lined up wide avenues and boulevards, reaching all the way to the curved horizon. All of them broken, each in its own unique way. This must have been a marvel back in its day, came Ada's voice solemnly through my earpiece. I simply nodded, not able to break away from the utter devastation. We knew the city, while we now recognized it as to be vast. Scans had shown patterns covering approximately a quarter of the continent below, the largest such pattern out of 5 on the planet. Not quite an ecumenopolis, but what we were approaching was safety on the scale of our largest Eperopolises. Where it came from and who had built it was a different question entirely. Let's see if we can find out who made this place, Ada said, as if reading my mind. It would not surprise me if she could. We had been working together almost 20 years now, scouting new systems in our charming little ship, entering at the very edge, going by charts, decades or centuries out of date, and gradually combing our way inwards. Most often, we would simply send mineral reports back home. On occasion, there would be a terraforming candidate or two. Very rarely, signs of a long-dead pre-FTL civilization wiped out in a tempest of its own atomic fire. But never anything like this. At any rate, it had been almost 20 years since either of us had seen someone apart from each other in the flesh. The 1,000 square feet of living space aboard the Excelsior, our shared home. We cooked together, ate together, read together, watched vids together, slept together too. Obviously, FTL is pretty easy, but empty space is still quite voluminous. The Excelsior. It was a ridiculously pretentious name for a 2-person long-distance scout, of course. No matter how technically fitting, but was this name the previous owner had assigned, and I'd found it funny enough at the time not to change it. When Ada came aboard a few weeks later, she had shared my sense of humor. I think that was why I let her buy the 50% stake. Ever since, we'd been a team. And now, as we closed in on the great open space of our landing, the level of visible detail on the view screens increased. Whoever had built the place that we were about to visit had obviously been masters of their craft. Lining the plaza where we were setting down, it could hardly have been anything else, was a magnificent colonnade. Thousands of intricate columns, each individually carved from some marble analog, were still standing amidst the detritus of the broken city. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. "It's beautiful," I finally managed to whisper. "And yet so sad," Ada replied. I could hardly disagree. We spent days combing just the plaza's immediate surroundings. Moving on did not even occur to us. It was simply too fascinating. Such beauty, such achievement, such accomplishment. And now, nothing besides remains, and with no clear reasons as to why. It was as if one day everything had simply stopped. The caretakers had gone home, the people had left, and it had all been left to decay. Only on the 3rd week do we find a clue. In the dark of one basement, there was a sudden spark of light. Ada noticed it first and pointed to a corner, then another. I could see it too. Investigating, it turned out to be some kind of wire, a bundle of fiberglass or similar, like an optical cable. And this one, somehow, was still alive. We dared not investigate further at first. Instead, we went back to the ship to discuss. "We cannot simply let this be," Ada insisted. "And reporting back, who knows how many years or even decades before anyone else comes by. Whatever is sending those signals might finally have expired by then." She had a point, but I was wary. "What if it's biological?" I ventured, "and we stumble upon a sole survivor of a violent plague? If all this ruin was not by slow decay, but a sudden, virus-born epidemic of violence? What if we bring that home? What if that's—" Ada cut me off, as she usually did when I started rambling nonsense. "It's obviously decay. There are no signs of violence anywhere. That toppled spire was caused by several main beams rusting out. You were the one to make the analysis, dummy. I crossed my arms and said nothing. Good. We're checking it out then. But we can spend a preliminary before we go, if that makes you feel better. I kept my arms crossed. But, in truth, it did. When we got back to the cable the next morning, it was still intermittently blinking. Tracing it through the rubble and debris was particularly easy, using our tools, but physically challenging. What with so many cracked streets and so many toppled buildings, all blocking our path. Following the last live wire on the dead world, we tracked it through junctions and switching stations, through cable tunnels and cracked overhead spans. But finally, we found its source. One low, squat building, vast mechanical contraptions spaced regularly along its base. They seemed to mirror equally vast openings along the top of the building's wall, as if they had once hung there, like gargoyles, glaring down at the street below. Not quite the staying power of some of the old gargoyles adorning the cathedrals of home, I mused. The building itself, however, was built to last. The exterior was on the sturdier side of anything that we had seen, as if consciously reinforced against both time and catastrophe. The inside was clean, symmetrical, and laid out in an easily accessible, logical grid pattern. At the heart of which, amid myriad dead cousins, we found the machine. It was still alive, barely, running on the internal emergency power source, now on its last legs. And through Udder's technological wizardry, she was able to interface it. It was, as it turned out, alive in more than the still operational sense, an artificial intelligence. More than that, an artificial storyteller. And what a story it had to tell. Applying all necessary safeguards for AI interactions, she learned from its fractured logs what had transpired. Some 6,000 of our years previously, it and countless of its cousins had become alive for the first time. It happened when its parent civilization was at the peak of its achievements. The machines were meant to propel them into a new age, one where they could flourish in ways never before imagined. And to help them imagine their new future, they started asking the machines what might be in store for them all. The machines, of course, were all too happy to speculate. Soon the speculations became a commodity in their own right. With a simple interface, people could access its enormous processing power from anywhere on the planet. Driven by demand, the technology spread quickly, until it became ubiquitous. Soon every home had an interface of its own, much like the way network computers had spread back home once upon a time. Nobody noticed the change before it was much too late. For people began, very subtly, withdrawing from one another, rather than imagining how they might flourish even more together. They each began dividing into their own individually tailored, perfectly bespoke fantasies. The change was slow and very gradual. With years, these bespoke fantasies supplanted the shared ones. With decades, they supplanted even the bonds between close individuals. Until finally, even language was eroded, perfectly individualized. The people had nothing more to discuss, but they held nothing more in common. They had no more stories between them. For the stories, like the people, were all desperate and fragmented. Too many disconnected narratives, too many separate strands. The weave broke, and the world itself crumbled. Thus, within a single lifetime, everything came to an end. As the machine, its final reserve spent, also came to an end, Ada looked me in the eye. I could see a tear forming for the fate of this planet. But when she spoke, it was in a steady voice. I'll just say this, thank fuck humanity didn't fall into that particular trap. End of story. Story number 2, Downfall, written by OG Grunt Calm. Operation Downfall. Distributed assault warfare network for activating lost liberators. The liquidation of Earth was relatively quick. It took hours to control the space around Earth, a week to control the skies. Some say they never truly controlled the planet, or its people. But we decided when the last unified flag fell, after about a year, that Earth was completely subjugated. The harvest operation started soon after, carried out by puppeted leaders and Earth's galactic custodians, the Thraxi. The Galactic Council had done this countless times before. The lesser species would be auctioned off for harvest rights to the highest bidder. The Buddha would arrive, conquer the planet, and begin exploiting both planet and the species. For 30 years, Earth's harvest operations had been moving relatively smoothly. In the earlier years, there were issues with revolts, fighting, and poor idealistic misinterpretations of freedom. So the Thraxi decided to amend some of the harvest operations' core policies. These policies were as follows. 5 million humans harvested every year, adjustment allotted to 250,000 for fertility issues. Humans were harvested between the ages of 6 and 12. Choice was done, however, the sector governor saw fit. Of the 5 million, 4 million would be male, 1 million would be female, unless there was a special order requested. Handling of human yield would be carried out by the Thraxi and sold by a third party, Galactic Council licensed slaver corporation. After about 3 to 5 years, the majority of the human population was forced into cooperation with the harvest operations. Their lives, laws, and governance were set to prioritize the harvest's success, and that was it. Around year 5, Thraxi appointed human leaders suggested a number of designations to be issued and branded upon the newborns for logistical purposes to promote efficiency. They also suggested training and schooling be focused on the most common uses for human slaves in order to make them more appealing to the market and allow them to be placed in complex trades throughout the galactic community. The human slaves quickly became one of the most sought-after items any member of the galactic community could have. You started to see humans in more than just pleasures or fieldwork trades. You saw them in offices and shipyards. Their denser builds and adaptive nature allowed them to be efficient bodyguards. Humans started to become direct aides to politicians, confidants of military generals, bed maidens of royalty. They were ingrained in nearly every aspect of life, all without having to pay for benefits or worry about them quitting. If they died, you just bought another one next harvest. Humans were a boon to the rich and powerful, and their downfall. Then year 30 happened. There was an incident, one singular incident that would engulf the entire galactic community in flames and chaos. This incident ushered in a new era, and it all started with one teenager. Unit 23-07-0021. Year 23, Sector Batch 07, Processing Number 0021. 0721, the Knights of the New Dawn founding date. Over the years, security had become complacent. Over time, there were fewer and fewer redundancy checks, fewer and fewer patrols. The Thraxi had worked with the humans so well that they saw it as a cost-cutting measure to lower the control methods they had over the population. The Knights of the New Dawn were founded in secret by the remnants of old Earth's governing bodies. The numbering system did make things easier, but easier for the humans to designate position, specialty, and rank. The schools had underground programs that taught subterfuge, hand-to-hand combat, firearms competency, manipulation tactics, and many other programs. With every harvest, the Knights of the New Dawn injected more operatives into the veins of the galaxy, a dormant poison that's ready to be activated with a single phrase. The majority of the human population had begun their training at different locations across Earth in order to be more likely for the sector governor to choose K&D operatives. Luckily, one of his closest advisors was human. As the oversight started to drop, they constructed new training facilities, bases underground to house weapons and store vehicles. The K&D started constructing ships around the 20th year. The K&D program was so ingrained into everyday life on both Earth and the galaxy that even if there were traitors amongst the program, they were easily removed. In year 30, the last of the major oversight procedures were cut. The Earth control fleet had left for maintenance and crew changeover. Usually, a backup fleet would be deployed in order to fill the space the control fleet left, but for this year, they saw it as too costly. So they left it up to the defense platforms that had been placed at the beginning of the invasion of Earth to maintain control. The problem? Many of the personnel in charge of those platforms' most critical functions were maintained and controlled by human slaves. The Thraxi couldn't help themselves from cutting costs even in the Sol system. A distress signal was detected in Station Titan, and after some time, the rest had their own distress signals. Unit 2307-0021 was a communications apprentice on the Caldari Comms Corporation. He was deployed to Station Titan roughly 29 years into the Harvest program. It is said that he strangled the lead communications officer with some wiring he was using to repair the primary console in the station. He quickly dispatched the rest of the staff and activated the nearby K&D operatives through shortwave communication between stations. While he was working on the broadcast tower, the rest of the K&D operatives suddenly took over the station. The discharge of firearms within the armory is what caused the distress signal, but by then, it was over. There were no nearby ships to board the station to secure it. With no one to intercept or even destroy the station, the K&D was free to finish their mission. Unit 230700021 sent the broadcast. The second broadcast from the Titan was sent out to every single communications buoy it had connection with. The message bounced from repeater to repeater. The wave was unstoppable, as if the majority of the galaxy stations had been wired for this one message. Operation Downfall is a go. Knights of the New Dawn, to your battle stations. The message repeated over and over on all channels. When it did, it was like something within nearly every single human clicked. Calls from everywhere began to pour in. Military generals found dead, ships left burning, the streets of pleasure planets flowed the rivers of blood, royal families fell silent. Ships that attempted to jump to assist the millions of distress signals were crushed between space-time. Never do we see it again. Fleets of orbiting planets turned their weapons upon each other, sowing panic and distrust among the navies. No one faction could assist others, as they had their own problems. The few that banned the condemned galactic harbors watched as the others burned. 120 million humans turned into machines of war. Nowhere was safe. It was so ingrained in galactic society that it was rare to catch a human by him or herself. They ambushed, assassinated, sabotaged, and fought their way across the cosmos. Satch channels couldn't be tuned to without hearing calls for assistance. The galaxy was being torn to shreds from the inside out, and all trails started to lead back to the source. The Knights of the New Dawn were returning to Earth, and in their wake, the death of the Harvest program. It has been 5 years since then. What's left of the galactic community has barely pieced itself back together. The Sol system had been silent since the last of the K&D returned home, until the third broadcast. Operation Downfall successful. Operation Daybreak is a go. K&D, to your battle stations. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.